let's hit. Great, fantastic. Thank you very much. So it is 7:04 p.m. And let's begin the event. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second edition in 2022 of SMPTE Washington, D.C. virtual event entitled Create More Content Faster with Less Cost and Carbon, featuring Blackbird video platform and editing solution. Now, this topic is very close to my heart since I practically began my career in this industry by working as an avid tech support, and subsequently worked as a nonlinear editor for more than a decade and managed Discovery's post-production facility support team in the US for several years. I think I should have either post or editing tattooed on my body. It is definitely permanently tattooed onto my mind. Tonight's event will try to show us, among other things, the benefits of the only pro editing platform in a browser, a seamless collaborative production for multi-location teams, as well as an ability of Blackbird to publish content to viewers in under 30 seconds. There will be a lively panel discussion moderated by one of your SMPTE DC managers, Jonathan Solomon of AWS. I encourage everyone to participate and ask a lot of questions. But before we meet the panelists and moderator, first we will conduct some SMPTE business. Hello again, everyone. My name is Maciej Ochman, and I am SMPTE DC Section Chair. Tonight's presentation is made possible by Blackbird. Thank you very much. Tonight's presentation is also recorded, and this material might be used for SMPTE and/or Blackbird promotional purposes. I would like to recognize at this point your section managers, officers, and volunteers who I suspect might be in the audience. And they are Joanne Carl, Melissa Davis, Tom Hackett, Jonathan Solomon, Phil Whiteblum, Greg Smallfelt, Fred Willard, Rick Singer, Carl Kuhn, James O'Neill, Peter Wharton, James Snyder, John Footen, Carlos Rojas, Brad Hughes, and Eric Hone. As you all know, we produce a lot of interesting events. Media Forward is one of such events that we are planning for the first week of May at Montgomery College, Maryland, where our student chapter is located. We already produced several of these events in the past, and they are designed for students interested in technical and production careers in media. Media Forward event offers them a chance to learn about the industry and career opportunities while networking with leading media professionals from our area. In the past, we brought in media staffing organizations, provided hands-on sessions on production and emerging technologies, along with opportunities to engage media professionals in one-on-one discussions. The event is open to all students from high school through graduate students. It is also an opportunity for SMPTE members to help the next generation of the broadcast media professionals succeed. Therefore, I am asking every attendee to consider getting involved with this event. If you are interested, please contact SMPTE DC managers at managers@smptedc.org, and I will post that email address in the chat. Finally, as the tradition will have it, we are here to support each other. So if you are in the need of a job, or you have a job that you are looking to fill, or you have a job you do not want and would like to nominate someone for it, please use chat to share details, or feel free to contact us again at managers@smptedc.org. Again, that email I will post in the chat. So without any further delay, I would like to introduce tonight's moderator, one of your DC section managers, Jonathan Solomon. Jonathan is with AWS, working as a partner solutions architect for media and entertainment. Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everybody, or good morning, or good afternoon if you're around the world and watching us or watching this later. Thank you all again for joining us for this presentation. It seems we might be getting a theme going here. Last month, we did camera to cloud to get your content to the cloud. And now we'll be talking about cloud editing with Blackbird. This presentation is going to be very interesting for two reasons. Well, for many reasons, but two that stand out. One is the ability to edit fully in the cloud. But the second one, which is an interesting angle on editing in the cloud, is the ability to reduce your carbon footprint. This has been a very important factor with our friends in Europe and an emerging factor in production here in the United States. So this is will be a good, if you're not familiar with sustainability and carbon footprinting, this will be some of this will be covered, although primarily it is focused on cloud editing. Our presenter today will be Hugh Dymond, who is a technical expert from Blackbird, and we will be taking questions. You can please use the Q&A panel in Zoom for questions, and we'll be I'll be sending those over to Hugh and Mike and Adrian from the team as needed during the session and possibly at the end for Q&A. So with that, I will throw it over to Hugh and let's start.
Perfect. Thanks, Jonathan, and appreciate everyone joining today. So as mentioned, we're going to be taking you through some of the key aspects of Blackbird itself and how it pertains to enabling both remote and efficient production workflows. And essentially, the whole mantra of Blackbird is really to enable greater speed, greater flexibility, and that's flexibility both from a user perspective and from a business perspective. And also, as mentioned, in terms of sustainability, but also operational and technical efficiency, which is really some of the highlights that we can start to explore when we look at things like carbon efficiency across both the platform and its usage. Now, it's fair to say over the last couple of years, it's very evident that the world has indeed changed. I'm sure many of us are working in our homes, returning back to offices or some form of hybrid operating model. Now, the world is always changing, and I think it's interesting when we look back over the last, say, 5 to 10 years or so, where originally, if you rewind 10 years, the challenges might have been around addressing these kinds of challenges. It's the conversion of the living room experience into the multi-screen experience, which, to all intents and purposes, whilst I wouldn't ever claim that we've solved all of those issues throughout the industry, we've come in great strides to be able to address a more nimble, agile, and flexible consumer base for getting content delivered to pretty much anywhere to be consumed, but also for various different unimaginable use cases when we rewind that clock, like, for example, home exercise and other various different things, the commute, with video being delivered to mobile devices. And, those were the problems that we probably thought we were trying to solve 10 years ago. And then essentially what we've got is an overlay of there being a very, very high degree of professionalism in true craft and post workflows, where essentially content at a very high degree of production value coming out of suites that might have originally looked like something like the one on the left, aspirationally looking more like something in the middle, and actually where we've kind of landed up is those two images on the right hand side. We've got our lady with a cat on the keyboard and a very standard office. The operational footprint for video creation has drastically changed, and obviously as an industry we've seen an acceleration of some of this through necessity with COVID, but also through innovation, and that's essentially our background is trying to address some of those key value propositions around creating more content, delivering more content, but also allowing the flexibility from a user's perspective to totally detach yourselves from all of the physical infrastructure and constraints of a world that might need fixed facility workflows. And essentially, the the key aspects which we see as pivotal for this, being able to address these challenges, are operational resilience. This is the ability to, as I say, work from anywhere, allow the flexibility to move workflows and workloads around, whether it be from on-premise workflows to fully cloud workflows, or a hybrid of both. And ultimately in an efficient way that's cost efficient, it's operationally efficient, flexibility for being able to address any of these workflows, and also adapt and innovate. So the ability to try other outlets, create reversioned content for different destinations that again could be experimental, but down the line they could become core business. So choosing platforms that enable all of that are absolutely key to the customers that we deal with day in and day out. And essentially Blackbird itself, our company name is Blackbird, but the product itself is also Blackbird. It is a truly cloud native video editing platform, utilizing a variety of patented technologies. I think on the last webinar, there was some commentary about the fact that as a vendor community, we all have our standards. So within the Blackbird ecosystem, we have our own video codec, which is utilized around a system of patented technologies for allowing rapid access to content, but also exposing a feature set which within a strictly browser experience, you might typically not believe is possible, which obviously once we get to the demonstration, we'll start to highlight some of the aspects of that. But as I say, a number of codecs and patented aspects of the underlying technology that we've got. And everything that you will see today from a demonstration perspective is running entirely in a standard web browser, without any plugins, no extensions, no desktop software, which again, when you think about the flexibility, let's imagine the transition of legacy technology into fully cloud native, even something like email or document management, where a number of years ago you might have had a word processing application on your desktop. In fact, many people still do. But the ability to not have any form of desktop application, have all of your content everywhere, and never have to worry about the logistics of moving it around yourself, or localizing edits or edit decision lists themselves. And just from a technology and a service provider perspective, a few of the key clients that we're dealing with, again, day in, day out, I'm sure you'll all recognize the majority of those, but essentially it straddles a cross section of clients in the industry, from those who are creating live, fast turnaround content for digital and social platforms. So people like Sky News Arabia, the National Rugby League, 11 Sports, right up to people who are accessing large content repositories of program material like A&E Networks, for example. Now, what all of these have in common is that they all obviously trust us day in, day out, but they're also using us to gain the flexibility and agility they need to be able to adapt and change and evolve within the industry and within their capabilities. And from a technology provider perspective, we recognize that partners are always pivotal to be able to address both a wider market, but also a wider selection of workflows. And just to pick out a few of these particular partners, obviously we've got Jonathan representing AWS today. They're one of our key partners for delivering a number of the clients that you've seen on the previous slide, where we run some of our core technology inside AWS. A couple of others to pick out. We most recently announced support for the SRT protocol with some of the work we've been doing with High Vision, and a variety of others. But really, these are ways of proving a number of things. It's the flexibility of how our technology can run with and coupled with these partners, but also interoperability exercises, which again, from a customer's perspective, assist in that transition from where they are today to where they would really like to get to. And ultimately, the benefits that we see from some of this underlying technology and what we've created from it is ultimately driven by speed. We've got some reference points with some of our clients of being able to get from live stream to viewer in under 30 seconds for short form, sort of social driven clips. And this is really key to a number of different flows. Obviously, when it comes to speed, one of the things that you can begin to exploit is the fact that you can use that content to upsell premium services like a subscription to your app or your OTT platform, because you can be the first to get that content to market. And that's absolutely key to a number of different workflows, especially in things like the live sports markets. Flexibility, again, we'll come on to how this manifests itself, but a principle of it is that we enable professional grade editing to be done by anyone, and we'll show you some of the role-based access that we've implemented to support that style of workflow, whereby someone who may be, for example, just interested in grabbing short clips from a live stream can be interacting with exactly the same content and platform and editor experience that somebody who can then also do some additional crafting could be. So adding highlights or blurs or crops to other additional elements inside the edit itself. And the last two partly fit together, but lower cost and ultra sustainable. So being sustainable on both infrastructure, so this is having a very lightweight technical footprint, but also from an operational perspective as well, being able to utilize far less resource, reducing travel costs, for example, especially on sporting events. I'm sure many of us have been involved in cloud and remote production workflows, which can drastically reduce the amount of spend and cost on travel, accommodation, and all of the other aspects that tie up into some of the sustainability aspects, as well as the infrastructure costs. So let's take a look at how we achieve this architecturally. Essentially, what we have within Blackbird is a number of different aspects, but it all starts with, as a customer, your content infrastructure, which is essentially to say that your media and your workflows, they've got to exist somewhere. So let's take a use case. Let's imagine I've got some live streams passing through potentially an on-premise encoder. And let's also imagine I might have a large repository of content sat in an S3 bucket in AWS. Essentially, what we do is to run our technology called Blackbird Edge, which is essentially a piece of software which will read source content, whether it's streaming content from encoders, for example, in RTMP, HLS, Zixi, or SRT streams, or indeed in a more legacy workflow, SDI, and indeed live growing MXFs. Essentially, each one of those is being generated by some other piece of equipment in the value chain, which Blackbird Edge can then read, and then what it really does is to read, reference, and cache any content that might be needed for high quality, but it's generating a very low bit rate, very efficient proxy, which is our own video codec, which is then used exclusively within the platform itself for serving the editor workflows. And essentially what you've got then is that within about 5 seconds, that proxy of your stream or your file will traverse through the Blackbird backend into the editor. And essentially there's a whole hierarchy and tenant structure for handling a true multi-tenanted backend. But essentially, the net result is that within about 5 seconds, a user sat on a standard internet connection in a very standard JavaScript-enabled web browser, no plugins, no extensions, can be using that content with about 2 megabits of bandwidth. So let's imagine a couple of use cases there. That content that's potentially streaming could be 50, 60 megabits per second, maybe in a sort of internal broadcast stream. If it's file-based content sat on an S3 bucket, it could be 200, 400 megabits per second quite easily, but still we're able to access it frame accurately within about 5 seconds on our 2 megabit connection. So essentially what we've got there is the overlay of the editor, which we'll show you in the demonstration. And ultimately what that's doing is creating pointers. It's entirely cloud-based. Nothing is local to the user's machine. But essentially what they're doing is creating and editing content, which is ultimately landing in edit decisions. And when a user wants to publish some content, those edit decisions turn into render and publish requests, which go back to that Blackbird Edge server appliance. And the edit decision gets turned into a render job, which will then render against the original high bit rate that was originally referenced. So if it is indeed a combination of, let's use the example of maybe an SRT live stream at 45 megabits per second, and some of our 400 megabit source media in an S3 bucket, essentially the Edge will go away, source the various different portions of that content that are required for the render job, and ultimately deliver the asset off to whatever the delivery point may be. So none of the original content touches the user's workstation. There's a level of abstraction between them and any infrastructure and any content. So it's secure from that perspective. They've not had to download any specific application, but the net result is that what's getting delivered is truly rendered against the original high bit rate, so that quality is sustained throughout the workflow. And then the onward delivery and submission to social platforms, to cloud storage, to internal CDNs or CMS platforms or MAM systems, or even back to nearline stores and an EDL data off to NLEs for further crafting. Essentially what you've got there is this whole ecosystem which is driven from the gateway of Blackbird Edge and the user interface of the editor itself, which we'll come on to shortly in the demonstration. We've got a few reports around some of the aspects of cost saving that this can bring. I'm sure we'll be sharing some of the links to this, but essentially, if you imagine that that architecture translated into cost, and we'll run through a few scenarios for infrastructure in particular shortly, but just to really highlight that we've got some reports that back up the data that ultimately you could be saving 35% on your total cost of ownership compared to the various different capex and opex that's involved in cloud-based video editing. And likewise on carbon efficiency, from looking at the architecture, again, you can start to understand how not moving content, not having to upload it to any particular cloud service, not having to duplicate content, as well as the overlay of being able to run these workflows on a limited amount of infrastructure, because from an end user's perspective, you don't need a high grade workstation, you don't need a GPU, you don't need any of the complexity that's associated with a traditional edit platform. And essentially everything is handled then between the editor and that edge service. And both of those are highly optimized, both from a technology perspective, but also from an operational efficiency perspective. And that report is also available on the link that you would have seen there. I'm sure we can share that. So let's run a few scenarios. So let's start off with the idea of a traditional edit workstation, a use case of a live stream being written out to storage for live growing edit and delivery off to a bit of social and maybe an OTT platform. So from a technology perspective, this is the sort of thing that a single user edit station would be architected around. You've got a live stream, an encoder, some storage, a desktop NLE, and then the onward delivery to external platforms. That can be lifted, shifted, put in the cloud, and all is well with the world. So that's sort of the single user use case. Let's then dial that up to 5 users. Essentially what you've got is very much the same thing, copied and pasted 5 times. So immediately you've got a couple of challenges. One is the orchestration of that particular scaling. And the other is the fact that it is a vertical scaling, that you're needing to add workstations per user for all of the concurrency that you have in that workflow. So if I need 5 concurrent users, I need 5 concurrent instances of whatever the platform is that I'm using. So from a scalability perspective, let's think up where that ultimately lands. But the alternative is, in our world, in a Blackbird world, essentially what you've got is, for a single user, you've got an edge node which does your background processing of capturing and serving media to the editor. The editor is co-hosted on a SaaS backend, so there's no infrastructure needs for customers. And the delivery is direct from that edge service. So what we've done is, for a single user there, it's ultimately replaced a workstation at an NLE spec to maybe a virtual machine with just some CPUs attached to it for doing the capture, and then at the right time doing the renders. Again, one of the key things there is that we're operating on a very low bandwidth from a user's perspective. So things like latency is really not an issue. We've built high latency handling into the editor itself to handle unpredictability of internet connections, and we've got a truly global user base. So unlike a lot of the hosted desktop solutions that might require high bit rate, low latency connections, they're the sorts of things that we are built around. So this is an example of the single user technology footprint for the same style of workflow. So let's scale that up to 5 users. Anyone observant would have spotted that not much changed. The only thing that would have changed is you go from 1 connection to 5 connections at the top, but there's no additional infrastructure needs. There's no scale up needed. And essentially that one edge node, or in a larger scale, you can have multiple nodes grouped together for high performance, or imagine 20 or 40 live streams, or increased concurrency of publishing. But the key thing is that you don't need to increase infrastructure for just user access. And the same for 100 users. You can have 100 users sat off exactly the same technical infrastructure. And this is how you can start to understand how the scaling of a solution like this breaks that mold of workstation per user from a centralized, cloud-oriented deployment perspective.
We have a question about the editing. If now's a good time to pop that in real quick.
Of course, yeah.
Yep. So Eric is asking. He wants to confirm it's proxy editing, and thus how powerful are the editing tools? Brad adds in respectively about fonts and editing plugins.
Great questions. Yes. So Eric, yes, you're absolutely right. It's proxy editing. It's proxy editing with full multi-layer video and audio. So anything up to 18 video channels, 36 audio channels, titling, subtitling, or burnt-in titling with support for fonts, absolutely fonts and styling. Now, where we hit the glass ceiling of capability, and where we would quite happily say there's a point at which you might want to go back to a traditional NLE workflow, would be things like plugins. So let's imagine you're using motion blur or some other processing plugin. That would be where you'd be skewed back into a more traditional workflow. And that's really, we don't position ourselves as a full craft editor, but we do enough to get the job done in the majority of video processing workflows, especially oriented around live sports and news, highlights production, that sort of thing. Yeah, great questions.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. So just a couple of customer examples before we dive into a bit of a demo that might also help you visualize some of the workflow. So being the SMPTE DC, we thought this would be a particularly relevant one. So one of our clients we onboarded about 3 years ago now, I think it was. The Department of State. They run a workflow whereby they're operating out of the facility in Washington, and they're actually utilizing some of our Blackbird Edge technology for capturing in their broadcast facility. So HD, SDI signals and file contribution workflows that pass through their own infrastructure. And ultimately what they're doing is using it for a lot of access for remote and distributed production teams, and repurposing and edit for redistribution of a lot of press conference information and newscasts. Destinations for that include web and social, so web being state.gov, which is powered by Brightcove. So we've got a direct push and integration with their delivery point there. And ultimately it's about getting information, video information to end consumers in the fastest possible way. And another one slightly different from a use case perspective is Delta Tray. Obviously, we recently had the Super Bowl. So essentially, there's a variety of sporting workflows that wrap around a Delta tray, which the majority of them are around taking broadcast uplinks that have been pulled either back to base on IRDs and decoded back to the SDI domain, or workflows that run entirely in the cloud on live streams operated remotely. Key thing being that the end user experience is identical in both of those cases. The users never need that direct access to the content, and everything is handled remotely. So that's a combination of delivering again off to OTT platforms, things like the NFL Game Pass, alongside some of the leagues and federations' own services. So, for example, with European Tour for golf, off to their own web, which coincidentally is actually another Bright Cove delivery, much like the Department of State. Okay, so we get into some of the demonstration aspects. So we're going to do a bit of a tag team on this, and my colleague Mike's going to be our honorary clipper, and I'm going to be our honorary editor, or our noble editor for today. So before I just throw this over to Mike, what I'll do is just quickly orient yourselves with the editor itself. So I think it was Eric who might have asked if it was a proxy workflow. Yes, it is. You'll note here I've got access to the editor in front of me. Mike's got exactly the same. Now, he is importantly logged in as a slightly different role. So he'll get a different view. But essentially what we've got is a whole structure whereby we have a library of content, which is essentially shared assets. So the shared assets are shared across any of the other users that have access to this library. So let's imagine the context of that. So we recently did confidentiality strikes, but some sporting winter games and all the various different sporting events every day were landing in the library, which means that you can avoid the risk of people deleting, moving, annotating the wrong clips. It's all read-only in the library, so nobody can actually modify it as an end user. But there's also your own content as well. So having the ability to save and modify your own edits inside the editor. And really what you've got is then a number of different aspects and features that are baked into the tool itself. But fundamentally, it's a dark screen NLE experience with full keyboard shortcut compatibilities that support typical shortcut sets like matched key sets to Media Composer, Premiere, Final Cut, and then a lot of flexibility built around the back end behind things. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Mike to kick off a bit of a start of this editorial process we're going to run cross-Atlantic.
Great, thanks, Hugh. Yes, if you didn't notice from Hugh's accent, he is over in England right now, and I'm up in New England, coming from Vermont. So we'll be collaborating on this, and I'm actually logged in the same role, but to keep this true to form, I'm actually not an editor. So I'm going to change my view to a story mode. And first thing I want to do is go to the library that Hugh mentioned, and I'm going to pick up the live stream. Let's see, we have today's live stream, and I'll just throw it over here in my source window. I'll close the library. And you can see it's been running right now. What I'm seeing on the green is showing frames that are caching locally, but I can jump to any point in the live stream that's been playing, and I have immediate random access, and the frames around wherever I land will start loading. And if I scrub all the way down to the end, you can see that this is a growing file. The little chevrons show me that, and then it'll jump every couple of seconds. I'll see some more content. So I can go ahead and I can expand this time frame a little bit. You can sort of see these frames around either side of my cursor are starting to load. And I can see a visual representation of both the audio and the video. So I can go ahead and sort of zoom all the way in and I can see individual frames. If I zoom far enough in, all the way at the max there. So let's go back out. So I'm going to take a couple of shots here. Let's mark it in, mark it out. And I've got some captions enabled as well. I can just drag that over here and I'm going to start just building a story that Hugh's going to have to make something out of. And I'm going to give him a variety of shots so it won't make any sense for him. I'm marking in, I'll mark it out. We'll see what he can do with this as a skilled editor. So I'll put that shot over here. Let's just go back earlier. This one looks good. Mark in, mark out. So I can go ahead and create as many of these as I want. Let's go back to the end here. Let's see what anything new's come in. And we'll take this latest shot here, in and out. Now I've made a little string out sequence here so I can play the sequence back here in this monitor.
Risking it onto the unknown. Failure.
Not the world's most wonderful edit here, but there it is. And I'm going to go ahead, hit the save icon, and I'm going to save this. And let's call this SMPTE. So I've gone ahead and saved that, and I'm going to now stop sharing so you can see what Hugh sees on his. Is that good for you, Hugh? You like my string out? Can you make something out of that? You're on mute, Hugh. All right, so I think if you start sharing, it'll just stop me, Hugh. There we go.
Yeah, we're getting there. Hopefully you can see my screen back again. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so as Mike said, we, in this context, are part of the same user pool. We're part of the same account structure within Blackbird. This is the edit that Mike just created. Obviously, he created it as more of a story edit than an editorial edit, if you like. But essentially, I can see he's put 4 clip selections together. Some of the observant of you might have noticed that this source stream actually has some closed caption data, which has also been pulled through into the editor and would obviously flow out into any output deliveries, as in data that gets pushed into exported files. But essentially, there's a few things then. So Mike was operating in the kind of context that we would often see for short form clipping. So people who are grabbing short form newscast information and publishing. So typically for the likes of social, digital, online publishing. And essentially, there's a number of different features that overlay on top of that. And he also showed you very briefly the capability of displaying, zooming, and navigating through the content. There's also there's another efficiency gain hidden inside there that you'll note that as you load content, it's probably slightly small on the screen, but you get this red display, which is essentially the content is fully navigable. And this goes back to some of the small tricks that we do internally to gain efficiency on bandwidth and latency. So essentially what it's doing is caching keyframes, gives me full scrubbability. And at the point at which I begin to settle on things, you'll see the bidirectional caching begins. And because the codec itself is designed to be able to be played in multiple different speeds, directions, it'll begin to cache as it thinks it probably should. Now, what that means is that and because the codec itself is kind of like fragmented, you never have to download everything to begin working, which again is a bandwidth saving. It's also helping handle with latency conditions. But you'll see there at this particular point, I've got a number of seconds cached in front, a number of seconds cached behind. So typical use cases for editorial is that I'm going to locate roughly the right spot, navigate through and find the exact clip I need. So what the editor and the platform's doing is communicating between each other. And let's imagine whatever video frames I'm interested in editing haven't traversed from the edge up into the editor yet. Essentially, when I start to navigate, what's happening is when I begin to settle on these regions, the editor is requesting those frames to get relayed from the edge into the editor again. And this kind of interactivity between the user experience and all of the background infrastructure means that we gain a lot of efficiency on the egress from the edge back through to the editor. But that's some of the magic, and I should say we've also got an architecture paper that's going to be published fairly soon that describes some of the tips and tricks that we've got for doing some of this optimization. But let's dive into the editor in a bit more detail. So as you've probably seen, it appears very much like an NLE that anyone who's done any editing. I know Maciej mentioned at the top he'd obviously been working a lot in maintenance departments for post. But essentially, I've got full trim capabilities, the kinds of things that I would expect on a fairly standard NLE experience, even in a browser. Trimming content, reviewing it, playing it in multi-speed, those are fairly standard things. So let's go a bit deeper into this. So essentially I can dynamically and on the fly add video and audio channels, as well as additional things like caption tracks. So obviously this particular source has an embedded caption track, which has been pulled in by that edge process as it's been ingesting. I could have a secondary one if those captions aren't relevant to my particular territory or destination, because these captions can be driven from in-stream or from secondary manual creation or modification. And a lot of workflows, obviously, live captioning isn't the greatest. So you can also use it as a mechanism for correcting things like typos and spelling mistakes, etc. So in terms of the track capabilities, I mentioned it briefly in the questions about what we support, but it's anything up to 18 video channels, which if you think of the types of workflow that are wrapped around fast turnaround, the majority of fast turnaround edits are going to be sat at 3, 4, 5 video channels. Obviously, audio might be a bit more comprehensive in the layout if you had, say, a 16-channel source that you just wanted to pass through. But the capability is there. So let's go through grabbing maybe a bit more of this original source content. So I'm going to just pick out a couple of bits. Now, I'm actually going to modify some of the patching here. So rather than dropping the video and audio across the default tracks, I'm just going to pop this in as a shot over the top of these two. Like that. And I'll drop that down onto the timeline there. So I'm pushing that right onto the second track. You'll note there that I've actually extended it far too long, operational error. So let's just trim that back a little bit and just check I've got something relevant. So essentially what you'll see here is 2 video channels. You'll note the full Z ordering that's embedded across the platform. And let's do a few more things. So let's imagine I needed to do a video crossfade, an audio crossfade between two of the clips, potentially trimming some of those crossfades to modify the durations. We do a lot of default durations, but just to make sure I've got a nice smooth transition between the two, and audio control at the same time. Let's then also drop a fade at the start. We'll go fade white through to this snow content. So we've got a white through to the first clip, a dissolve across the video and audio. We could then drop another video transition, but let's make that a let's go full George Lucas. Let's have our clock wipe, just because we can. And you'll start to see that you can begin to build up a more comprehensive composition. So I'm now fading in the upper clip on the second track. So again, Z order fully followed. Let's fade that one back off. So I've essentially bypassed some of that content. And let's just trim some of Mike's shot down to make it a little bit shorter there. But if I wanted to keep some of that duration, let's just extend it. So let's turn that into a slow motion, and then finish off trimming off that content. So now what I've got is the final clip extended out as a slow-mo, and we are good. So in addition to that, we've got our closed caption data. Let's add some titling, at which point, obviously I'm doing this just manually, but we can have our various different brand fonts preloaded in. So let's grab this one. Again, talking about efficiency, we've got support for any number of fonts in the platform, and these are typically customer supplied, but essentially none of them actually get downloaded unless they're needed. Again, small tricks for being able to adopt to a more agile, nimble workflow. So that is an InVision title there that I've just added across the top, with the associated font and style, which can also be held as defaults from whatever the brand preference might be. We'll just drop that to a lower opacity, and then make it cover the extent of our clip, just because we can. Right, so that's a bit of the basic timeline editing, but there's a few important things to note. Absolutely none of this edit data is on my workstation. It's been generated in the browser. I can save it back. Obviously, this started life as Mike's edit. You'll note I've just saved over Mike's edit. Now, nothing ever gets lost. There's no possibilities of accidentally deleting or overwriting. We've got full version control. So if I did indeed want to go back to Mike's previous version, I can quite happily do so. Or I can stick with my own. Anything can be pulled back. If I deleted it, it's not actually going anywhere. It's just going into the recycle bin, which will sit there for 30 days until it'll disappear off. But these are all mechanisms of storing it, because it's just EDL data that's being rendered out by the editor application itself. And there's also the full recovery bin. So I've got undo history on anything that I create. So
hey, Hugh, if I can just chime in, first of all, thanks for improving my string out there. But we did have a question come in about alpha channels. So I was wondering if you might be able to sort of demonstrate some capabilities around that as well. But thanks for cleaning up my edit.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so in terms of alpha channel, we do support alpha channel. Every video track has alpha. Now, typically, and yeah, so there is full alpha channel support across stills and animations. So animations being QuickTime animation or a ProRes with alpha. So if you import one of those from the edge, the alpha gets persisted. Let's see if I've got some branding things that'll fit on this particular, here we go. So here's some logos. So let's drop a third video channel. Let's drop our logo over the top. He says confidently, yeah. So that's a simple example of a static alpha. If I just move that slightly out of the way there. Yeah, simple example of the static alpha. That's actually just an embedded PNG, but hopefully you get the idea. So what I've done there is put that onto the top layer. I'll extend that out right from the start to the end. So yeah, short synopsis, alpha is available. Typically there's two different sources. It's either from the source or it's from some aspect of the editorial process that I've added in.
While we're in the editor here, Dana asks regarding blurs to mask or cover children, suspects, and so on, portrait mode, conversion landscape, side wings, all that typical stuff we have to deal for TV. Can you talk to that?
Yes. Sorry, was that Dana? Yeah. So
yes.
Perfectly timed, Dana. That was almost like I'd asked you to do so. So thank you for asking. So yeah, underneath any clip I've got the ability to expose effect channels. So what I've got here is a basic composition. So let's explore a few use cases there. I've got color adjustment. So what I'm going to do here is modify some of the color control. So I've got saturation, and you'll see here it's a gesture-based saturation control where I can control the amount of color saturation in the particular image on the clip that I can see. I've got black level and white level control for correcting any issues in live content that might not be optimal. Again, it's gesture based. So we wouldn't call ourselves, and this is again one of these things, we wouldn't call ourselves a color grader, but we would call ourselves a color adjuster, which again, for the style of fast turnaround is often enough to get the job done. And then moving down, I've actually got 4 different effects channels on top of color correction. Excuse me. So if I expose that, you'll see I've got on this particular account, I've got 4 different effect types available. I've got a black and white, which is effectively the same as a desaturated color, but it's available as a standalone effect. A film effect, which is a little bit more consumery with pops and clicks. But yeah, absolutely, blur and highlight. So let's use the blur as a use case. Obviously, what I've got is 4 channels. So these 4 effect channels can be 4 blurs, 4 highlights, 1 blur, 3 highlight, 3 highlight, 1 blur. Essentially, it's a limit of 4 per track. What I've done there is to add the blur. You'll note it's blurred the entire image, at which point I've got the ability to add a mask. And what I'm actually doing here is just using my my mouse wheel to control the level of, sorry, the size of the blur. And then I've got controls for being able to do things like modify the square or circle factor of that particular control, the direction, the orientation, and also the movement as well. So knowing my typical thing, I've probably chosen somebody who doesn't move. Yes, that is exactly the case. So typically, if I go back to someone that does move, in fact, I'll tell you what I'll do. Let's unlock it. And what I'm going to do, you'll see I've got this 0, 25, 50, 75, and 100. That's essentially the duration of this clip. Obviously, going from the previous clip, there was a transition. So this is showing me the position, size, orientation of that blur throughout that particular clip. So there's a start and an end control frame, and I can actually control those. So what you're going to see now is that I've moved on my final control frame, I've moved the blur position. So over time, you would see it shift between my central character there. Obviously, this wouldn't be something that I would want to do, but it'll shift from my central character, which you'll see on the monitor in a second there, and it'll move over to the right-hand character just there. And essentially, you can insert as many control frames as you need. So it'll be able to support something that's rapidly moving across the screen. And what it's doing there is to interpolate between those various different control points. The default is it'll do a linear interpolation. So if I've got 2 control points, it'll move from one to the other. But we've also got full Bezier implementation for doing non-linear transformation of size, of location. So location being Z or Y across anything. So yeah, there's full blur capacity. And similar to the blur, I could also come along and add maybe a highlight. So let's imagine I was actually interested in highlighting this guy on the left. Same control metaphor and same control characteristic, whereby I'm able to locate position and map over keyframes time. So I've done basically the same sort of thing with a highlight mask that's opening out, closing out from a central highlight into the individual character there. I've just done squares there, but square, circle, plus rotation, all entirely possible. As I say, four effects channels per clip. And then in addition to that, we've also got pan and zoom capability. So this would become relevant in a use case where I might want to have a particular piece of content which has been resized. So let's do this. And you'll see there that I've done a transformation effect on the previous clip there. Just after the wipe, zoom in, and there's a bit of a crash edit there, but you get the idea. So the full pan and zoom allows you to do picture-in-picture across anything. So again, once you overlay anything up to these 18 channels with your 4 effects channels, your pan and zoom per channel, you can start to imagine you can build up some real complexity in the edit for getting the job done, so to speak. Very well timed question, thank you, Dana. Good, and similar on audio, as we've seen, there's a full keyframeable leveling control. So I can do leveling and panning. So here's my level control, whereby I can individually control clips on the timeline and their own levels with clipping indication. I've got VU meters as well, which I can expose, but for the sake of screen real estate, I won't. And essentially, you've also got the ability to sort of keyframe audio moves. So if you need to do ducking for particular workflows, or you're adding additional audio into something, then that's all possible as well. Again, all of this is happening on the proxy. None of the original content is being touched. That live stream has probably now completed, but I could have been publishing this during the time at which it happened. But essentially, the process of publishing is really as simple as just dragging an edit to one of our destinations. And at that stage, you can have optional information on some of the published points. But what it's doing, and that's a rather unfortunate caption called failure, but it's not a failure, that is indeed the caption. But essentially there, what I've done, and this is actually using our own player technology, which is essentially representing that EDL and using the Blackbird codec to display it, which means that it is indeed an instantaneous publish because it's strictly only a metadata publish. There's absolutely no server-side render for this at all. So in rapid, fast turnaround sort of review workflows, there's zero infrastructure need to support this kind of high-speed publish, as well as the more traditional deliverables. So delivering off to an H.264 for digital, a multi-destination for broadcast, an OTT platform with XMLs and metadata, incredibly flexible in that respect from input to output. Super. Good. So that's,
if I can just add one point on the JavaScript player link there. Because we haven't rendered any media, we're actually reading the same proxy files that you see in the editor. That player can be used for playing forwards, playing backwards, frame accurate access to the content that's there. We haven't rendered anything, so it's it's not only very fast, but also it's not a streaming format, so you have a much more flexibility in how you consume that that content.
Yeah, very good point. Thanks, Mike. Great. So
Joe has a question. Is there a way to lock the playhead position in the timeline so the actual program scrolls underneath the playhead and you see really briefly what was and what's coming up? I can describe that if you go back to the editor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Joe, I think I got you here. So in the editor, right there in the middle, you've got your marker. And Joe, I think what you're asking is for the marker to stay there, and if you zoom into the timeline, so you're seeing at the yep, and then you hit play. I think what Joe's asking about is for the timeline to move through that.
Ah, I see. So sort of the content to move underneath this centrally positioned.
Yes.
Yeah, not at present. No. So at the moment, it'll behave a bit like a fairly standard NLE in that it will swipe off to the right and then reposition you. But that's an interesting idea.
Gang synchronizer is what he calls it. Yes.
Yeah.
And I'll remind you, you had mentioned in Q&A that you would talk about certification, InfoSec qualifications, and so on.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for the reminder. Yeah, there was a question about let's be specific, government certification and Mpaa. Yes, thank you. Yeah. So we don't have government or Mpaa. We do have full SOC 2, SOC 2 Type 2, which we've had for I think about 18 or 24 months in total since we went SOC 2 Type 1. And those reports are available. I don't think they're posted publicly, but they are available from ourselves. Obviously, there's a lot of security and restrictions. SOC 2 itself being more service provider oriented, but something we're particularly proud to have from a sort of not only security perspective, but business process, disaster recovery, and other aspects of a framework that's not just video specific.
And regarding Mpaa, any info on that? Motion picture.
It's not something we've gone down the path of doing Mpaa strictly. Obviously, we follow a lot of best practices in general in terms of content security and segregation, but no, as a framework, it's not something we follow directly.
That's we've got some Q&A coming up, but we'll let you keep going through the presentation.
Super, thank you. Well, we're coming towards the end of it, and really the sort of the wrap up, which hopefully you'll have caught through the demonstration, is really that the vision for what we've created is to try to sustain all of these aspects of speed, of flexibility, and quality without having to make those compromises get the job done faster than you could do in other workflows. And really, we see this, and from a technology and from a product perspective, we see our evolution being overlaying additional features on and capabilities on, with the key thing being that every customer that we have follows and gains from those features, with it being SaaS and essentially a platform and a service to end customers. And a few recognition badges we're quite proud of. Again, NAB, one of the product of the year. A couple of others that were also announced, and a new one. Obviously, we mentioned sustainability. We took you through some of the infrastructure and efficiency gains, but there was a new award in 2021, and we were the first recipients of it, which is the Environmental Sustainability Company of the Year, along with a variety of other awards we've been picking up over the years. So without further ado, a bit more of a discussion and Q&A. I see there's been a lot of activity that Mike's quite happily been chipping away at. But we're quite happy to open the floor to absolutely anything. So
I think we'll start with sustainability and carbon emissions. I know in the UK that's a big deal. There's been a lot of testing around that. Could you just talk a little bit more about, in general, you can talk about obviously what Blackbird is doing. We'd love to hear that, but maybe for the folks here in the States who aren't as up to speed on what some of those initiatives are, what's going on with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive topic, but certainly from a product perspective and from a technology perspective, one of the key things that Blackbird as a company originally started to do was allow for high levels of efficiency from small amounts of technology. And from a wider industry perspective, something that is a very typical requirement on any form of vendor interrogation, particularly in the UK, but also across Europe, would always be some form of sustainability policy. There are a number of entities that we've been working with recently. The carbon emissions study that we commissioned last year and is available. I'll try and pull that slide back up again, but it details out, that there's a fundamental problem in the video industry, that the things that we do, and as many of us being technologists, the things that we do are somewhere consuming carbon, whether that's power, whether it's heat, whether it's both, whether it's travel, whether it's all the other things associated with something, whether it's use of plastics or non-recyclables. It's a very wide-ranging topic, but some of the key things we've been working on is making sure that the efficiency that we do in the technology space gets recognized. And we actually also became, I believe, the first editing platform to be added to the Albert Sustainable Supplier List. And Albert, for anyone who isn't aware, is an initiative that I believe is run by BAFTA or one of the UK entities around sustainable program production. So typically, again, in a UK perspective, things like the BBC, ITV, Channel 4 often use production companies, and they as entities have obligations on carbon efficiency and sustainability, and Albert is recognised as the gold standard for that. So yeah, it's a very wide-ranging topic. I would encourage anyone who's got any interest to go to our website and request that sustainability paper, because it goes through in quite a lot of detail around what the ultimate impact is, and the net challenge is that it's generating generating emissions that are ultimately melting sea ice, which is, that's a very long-term issue, but something that we can all assist to help in that grander scheme of things.
Hey, Hugh, I just put the links to the carbon efficiency report and the TCO report in the chat for everybody.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for that insight and kind of getting us ramped up on that here. A couple more questions. We'll go for about 10 more minutes, I think, before we'll start to get people drifting off to sleep, at least on the East Coast. And certainly in the UK. So earlier on, when you were talking about integrations, John Footen had asked, you wanted to hear more about integration options and approaches, perhaps with an NRCS or with resource management systems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, great question. So let's use NRCS. So we don't really do sort of NRCS panel style integrations. Now, when it comes to integrating into that sort of workflow, there's a few different ways of doing it. And SATs wrapped around the whole platform. We've got a set of APIs. Those APIs allow for integration. And we've had a number of companies over the last, say, 12 months who've integrated into it. And they allow you to do typical things like connect to the platform, authenticate. We've got single sign-on from a centralized identity provider, as well as content APIs. So instructing us to ingest things. So context of that is if you've got a production system which contains production system or even an archive that might contain potentially millions of assets, what you don't want to do is have to convert millions of assets to be able to utilize them in an edit flow. So those APIs allow you to do on request ingest or encode into the proxy for supplying to the editor, which has a gain on efficiency there. And then on things like export options, essentially the little blue icons that you might have noticed in the editor. If I just pull it up, these little blue icons on the left-hand side are my publish destinations, or publish outputs, I should say. So essentially what they are, they're defined by a set of business rules. So I've just pulled in the config screen for this, and you'll see that ultimately what you've got is the ability to determine the type of publish associated with this, what the destination is. So this could be Amazon S3, it could be off to Twitter, it could be off to YouTube, but essentially what you've got is a whole chained publish logic that allows you to do either closely coupled or loosely coupled integration. So this is an example of a multi-publish, which is spitting out AVC, some captions, a DNX HD, H.264 JPEG, and XDCAM. So that's a slightly exotic one, but let's use the example of something like Brightcove. There we go. So push to Brightcove, you define it, you add your credentials for authenticating to it, and then it's got a set of logic in here that says, let's give it a 1080 at 6 megabits. So from an integration perspective, we've got options either on flexibility in the case of having to do maybe a broadcast delivery with an XML that includes descriptive data, or full integration with an API adapter. But yeah, strictly around NRCS, we don't have an NRCS plugin, but we typically integrate at a slightly more abstracted mode through APIs.
Right, that's definitely the way the future is, API integration. So thank you for that. Can you talk more about the Blackbird Edge and what a customer would physically or virtually need on premises or in cloud with that appliance, I'll call it?
Of course, yeah. So the Blackbird Edge can scale anything from sort of an 8 or 12 core machine. It runs on Linux. So in the context of AWS, we typically run on a C5 series virtual machine. It runs entirely in cloud deployments, runs entirely in Docker. That's the sort of thing that we do at the point of deployment. But from an overall machine perspective, yeah, sort of a minimum of about sort of 12, 16 cores, similar in terms of memory footprint. Now, storage is typically, there are two different types of deployment. There's the type of deployment where we're just looking at files. So let's just jump back to the slide with the architecture. So there's the type of workflow where we're just looking at files, which is essentially the type of workflow where if I'm just connected to an S3 bucket and reading files there, I never localize that file. I just read it in code to the Blackbird, and then it's not on the machine at all. So we have a local cache, typically like a terabyte, which allows for high volumes of cache between source content and the editor. And then for workflows where we are storing a short-term cache of high bit rate, it depends on the bit rate, but again, it's fairly light because most of those fast turnaround workflows aren't much. But yeah, long and short of it is it's a Linux server running either in Docker or on a Debian build, and the software is fully integrated there, and everything is configured. Again, Linux can be something that isn't the most operationally friendly, but everything is configured through the cloud backend. Once it's connected, you don't ever have to worry about local machine maintenance typically.
So obviously for file-based workflows, you would on premises, you would connect that to your NAS or your SAN or whatever.
Precisely. Yeah.
And then for live video, what would you do?
So for live video, let's imagine SRT, ZXC, HLS, RTMP, they're just going to be IP protocols. So they could still be on-prem, or they could be in the cloud, or you could have a bit of both. We've got some clients who are doing, in fact, National Rugby League, I mentioned as one of the reference clients. They've got an SDI deployment on-premise, and then their backup is HLS running in public cloud. So they've got a bit of both, just for diversity.
Right. Next one is, how do asset management systems integrate with Blackbird?
Similar answer to the NRCS. We've actually done an integration with an asset management provider that was completed and signed over to the customer last week. So APIs, again, APIs, both are in, and then on the return, deliveries of asset and metadata with XML sidecars. So it's a pretty simple round trip in that respect. And we've got some reference integrations. I think we're going to be doing some more announcements of who those partners might be over the coming weeks.
Fantastic. Great news. And then when you and Mike were working together, I'm just looking at the notes here. Mike was creating clips with it was kind of an odd time code. It looked like 24 hours of time code. But when that popped into your editor, it looked like it had reset to 0. So so that's a very long-winded way of getting just time code from source clips pass into final editing.
Great question. So you'll see both of those on my screen right now.
That's right.
So what you've got is time of day, and this was a stream that was started at 23:59, and we do up count from there rather than a reset through 0. But my timeline time code defaults to a 0 based, which I can then right click and preset to 1 hour, 10 hour, or 0 in both non and drop frame. But you can also add or set your own default. So let's say, for example, you wanted everything to be an 095950 on sequence timecode, but source timecode is still maintained. So, for example, if I just pulled one of these clips out onto the desktop here, slightly secret feature, but essentially you can open as many players as you need, but that you'll see it's still got all the original timecode data against it. So it's just the difference between sequence timing and source timing.
Excellent. That's great. Answered that question. And then I think the last question I've seen here is the proxy. I think I saw the proxy was 2 megabits per second on the downstream to the workstation. How is the muscle memory latency work when you're trying to drive this from around the globe? So if someone perhaps is the systems in the UK, and you're in the US, how is the interaction time? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, again, great question. So the whole of the editor is trying to make assumptions on what you might do next. So when you grab a clip and drop it into a player, it's going to start doing bidirectional caching from wherever it's located on the playback window. Likewise, if I click anywhere else, like on the timeline, it's going to make sure that I've got stuff cached that'll allow me for doing the full bidirectional. Because what we want to do is make sure that what we're spending time in the browser doing is displaying what you need to see, which is the fully rendered composition. And we also do a few other clever tricks, like, for example, even when I locate a clip that I may be interested in, if I start dragging it somewhere, it'll begin caching it behind the scenes. So it tries to imagine what you might do, a little bit like lots of vehicles will, double clutch and try and decide whether you're going accelerating or decelerating. Very similar mechanics there. And we've been internet and cloud-based since day one, and had to build in a lot of tolerances for high latency. So we've got clients that are spread across, again, spread across Australia, right out into the Pacific, at Hawaii, and latency is just something that we as internet facing deal with all the time.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap. Hugh, thank you so much. I know it's about 1:30 in the morning there for you, so really appreciate you staying up. I hope Mike doesn't make you work tomorrow morning. Mike, thanks for answering the questions, and Adrian, thanks for being here as well. So really, thank you, everybody. That was a great presentation, very interesting. I appreciate the time and putting us in. Thank you to all our attendees as well for sticking with us and asking some great questions. And I'll turn it back over to Maciej for wrap it up from the SMPTE side.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jonathan. On behalf of SMPTE DC section and everyone in attendance tonight, big thank you to Hugh, Mike, and Adrian, our panelists. And there was a question about recording, so we will post the recording of this event on SMPTE DC YouTube channel. I'll work with Adrian to make sure that all those who have registered, who attended, will be communicated to once this recording is available, so you can all go and watch it and re-experience this event. So more information to come. And we really appreciate all the effort you put in together for tonight's presentation, live demo, and for sharing your thoughts and ideas with us. As somebody said, this was quite impressive. It's a great product, and we really appreciate it. Reminder, next meeting in person is planned for the first week of May, focusing on students. We'll share more details later. In the meantime, please consider getting involved with this event. Let us know via managers@smtdc.org. Since we are a few minutes after the allocated time, we'll wrap this up, and I wish everyone a good night, and I will see you all again in another SMPTE DC section, virtual or in-person event. Thank you all, and stay safe and get some good rest. Okay, take care. Thank you very much.